Okay, so like Jessica said, we're going to discuss how to create locations in ArchivesSpace. So your location records describe any storage location, so your shelves, your drawers, your file cabinets, your bins, the walls, etc., wherever you physically store your materials. This does not refer to your digital storage. So they are designed to track both the permanent and temporary location of materials. So this is, as I said, for physical shelving space and physical location. So if you wanted to track your digital files, you would do that in another system or through your digital object records. So location records use a coordinate system to represent a repository storage space. So that may be a range, a column, a shelf, that kind of thing, or your flat file storage drawers. So we're going to learn how to create both single and batch locations in ArchivesSpace. So to create locations, you can go to the Create menu, go down to Location, and choose either single or Create Batch. So we're going to do single first. It's important to point out that you link locations to top containers. So in order to have a location associated with a record, it has to be linked to that top container. And I'll go over that once we've created some. So as I pointed out earlier, you can create temporary locations. So if this is a temporary location, you would check the temporary box, and then this new field would open, and you could choose why this is a temporary location. So for conservation, exhibit, loan, it's in your reading room. This is a customizable list through the controlled values list. So you can add and delete values from this list to make it more relevant to your institution. So if it were temporary, you would add this, but you would have to make sure to go and remove a temporary location. You can't just set it for a certain amount of time. It's something that you add to it and then you have to remove later on. So you can create temporary locations if you would like to use them. So the only required fields are building, a barcode, classification, or a coordinate label. So these three are conditional. It's one or the other of these three. So we'll start with building. I'm going to use my institution as an example. So for us, it's Atlanta University Center Robert W. Woodruff Library. So that's a long name for a building. So we're going to call it the Woodruff Library. From there, you can add a floor, room, or area, but none of those are required. But if you want to be very specific with your location, it's recommended that you do this. This can help you with managing your physical space, so you can get as specific as you need to. So we're going to say that our storage is all on the third level, which we call the upper level. And we have different, not uphill level. And then we're going to call the room storage room 2, which is what starts our archival collection storage. If you wanted to go even more, like area, you could say, for like a temporary location, you could say exhibit area, you could say supply room. So this can be used to indicate the various area within the room that this location exists. You are able to add a barcode. So if you barcode your location, you can add this here. And that would be the numbers, the letters associated in your barcode. And you can do classification. So this can be a unique identifier for the location itself, and you can add that in this field. As I said earlier, you either have to add a barcode, classification, or coordinate, label 1, and indicator 1. So these three are not all required, it's one or the other. So we're going to start with coordinate label 1. So this would be the range or the flat file, that kind of thing. So we're going to call, in our storage room, we call it range. And we're going to give it a number or a letter. So it has to be either a number or a letter or the indicator. So we're going to say it's range 1. And then you can keep going. So if your boxes sit on shelves in a column of the range, you can go from there. So column, and if you do that by letters, you can do that. And if you want to identify the shelf, you can do that in coordinate label 3. So we can say, so this location is range 1, column A, shelf 1, and that indicates that you are in range 1, you're looking at column A, and you see a box or boxes on shelf 1, and that is the location where these materials live. And that's the furthest you can get down in a location. You only have 3 coordinate labels that you can use. And you also have the ability to add location profiles. So this refers to like the dimensions and such of a location. And if you're interested in space management, you would get more into location profiles. And I would suggest requesting that workshop if you're interested. And then you can also add repositories. So if you are an institution with multiple repositories and each repository uses different locations, you can assign each location to a different repository, depending on your permissions and what repository you're in. So it allows you to select a repository you're currently creating locations in. And then if you need to create them for a different repository, create them within that and select it so we know which one you know which one it's associated with. You can also add functions to your location. So say that this location is specific for oversized materials. You can identify that function. Are your acquisitions only stored here? You can identify that. Are your audio visual materials stored in this location? You can do that. So each location can have a function, or you don't have to. It's not a required field, but you do have the option to do such. So that's the basics of creating a location. I also want to point out that you can add multiple functions to a location. So if this area of the room houses your arrivals and your audio visual materials, you can identify that. So when you're done creating a location, you would press save location or +1. +1 will bring up a new record that's blank. It would save this one, bring up a blank record, and allow you to keep creating more locations. So that's the slow way of doing it. So we're just gonna say save location. Once you've saved it, you can see that it's identified the building, the floor, the room. If there was an area, that would come after this. And then in brackets, you see the coordinate labels. So we have range 1, column A, shelf 1. And when you browse locations, you can see all the locations in this instance, and we only have 1 so far. So we'll need to create more. When you're in browse, you can create locations as well. And you can also create the batch locations. So we're going to create a batch of locations now. Again, you can create batch temporary locations, but if you identify this whole batch as temporary, then they would all be temporary. So just keep that in mind. So you start with the base values, and then it builds the locations for you. So if all of these are in the Woodruff Library for upper level storage room 2, that's great. But if you're trying to create it for multiple rooms, you can only do 1 room at a time, 1 floor at a time in batch locations. So I'm gonna fill this out. And then storage room 2. You can also add location profiles and repositories to these batch locations, but they have to have the same profile and be in the same repository, because this is the default values for the batch. So if they're all the same size-wise, like the dimensions of the shelf is the same, then you can do that. If it's in the same repository, then you can do that with this batch. You can also add functions, but again, it has to be associated with the batch of locations. So if not all of them are used for arrivals or audiovisual, you don't want to add the function to the whole batch. So when creating batch locations, you're able to create a maximum of 1,000 locations, which is a good number of locations. You can still do all the coordinate labels. So you'll have range in this first coordinate range, column in the second one, because this refers to coordinate label 2, and then coordinate range 3 refers to coordinate label 3. So this will be shelf. Prefix is anything that you would want to add to the beginning of that coordinate label. So the number are the letters. So if you want it all to start with 1 and this be A through G and it say 1A, 1G, then you could do that. And you can also add a suffix as well. But only required things are the labels and the range. So we're going to create 2 through 4, range 2 through 4, columns A through C. And it has to be just a number or just a letter. If you wanted to add a prefix here, it wouldn't be able to interpret that and create the batch location. And then we'll do shelf 1 through 10. So depending on the size of your range, this could take a few minutes. And we also recommend that you preview locations before creating them. So you would click on preview locations. It would show you the number of locations that you're creating. You're able to go through and see that it's creating range 2, column A, shelf 1 through shelf 10, and then column 2, range 2, column B, shelf 1 through 10. And if you made a mistake, you can, depending on the number of locations you're creating, you can kind of see that in here, but it really depends. So we see that it's create all of them through range 4. Columns A, B, and C for each of them, shelves 1 through 10. And you can click continue. And then if you're good with that, you can create these locations. You can cancel if you need to, preview again if you're not certain, edit this if it's necessary. And so we're gonna click create location. And now it will take us back to the browse menu, and it created 90 locations. So now the browse is filled with all those 90 that we've created. If you need to edit some location records, you could do that. You can only edit what you can select in the browse menu. So you would select all that you can here, and then click edit batch up here. And then this would do a bulk update of all the records you selected on this page. But if you needed to edit more on the other pages, you would have to go and select those and edit them. If interested in doing more than just the ones on the page, I would recommend learning more about the API, which allows you to do more batch editing. So that is creation of locations in both single and batch. So you've created them, and you can create all the locations you want in ArchivesSpace. But in order for you to see it associated with a record, we need to now link it to top container. So there's different ways you can do that. Well, you can go to a collection, either an accession record or resource record, and edit it and add an instance. So let's say we want to add a container instance for this photograph. We go to instances, we add the container instance, go through the steps of adding that top container. So we'll create the top container, add any information here that you want. 2. And then you would, in the creation of a top container, add a location from there. So from here, you can type ahead. If I can spell today. And you can add the location from there. You can add multiple locations to a container. So you have a range of containers. You can add a location for each range. Or if you have a temporary location you need to add, you can do that here too. You would create and link the top container and you would be done. Just need to save it and that location would be associated with it. So you can go back to that instance and view it in a separate tab. And from there, you now have a linked location and you can edit if needed. When you're adding location, you can choose its status or current or previous, and you can choose a start date. Start date is usually defaulted to today's date, but you can change it if necessary. You can add an end date, especially if this is a temporary location, but that it's not going to give you that information. Like on that date, it's not going to notify you. You still have to come back and remove the temporary location, but you can add an end date and you can add notes about the location. If you already have a created top container and you're in a record, you would do the same thing, just slightly different. You would go to that record, go to its instances. You can view it, and then you can go into edit mode. And from there, you can add a location. And you can even create locations from this area of the record. So we're going to browse. You can filter the text. You can browse by name of the room. I'm going to select this random one and link it to locations. And then you just save the top container. So now it's been updated and has this location associated with it. But if you want to update multiple top containers at the same time with their locations, you would go to the gear menu here, click on Manage Top Containers, search for the resource or accession record you want to update. Choose all the containers you would want to update. So if you want to update all of them associated with it, with the same, all of them associated, you can do that. Select bulk operations. You can update either a single location or multiple locations. And so let's update multiple. Update multiple allows you to choose a different one for each container. And you can browse and create from this menu. And for each one, you can change it. And then you would just update the records. If you were to choose update single, you would only update each with the same location. So this allows you, if you've gone through and created all the top containers for a collection, and you didn't add their location, you can do so afterwards through the Manage Top Container function. So, but this depends on your permissions. Everyone in the implementation may not have access to this, so it really just depends. So that's another bulk operation that you can perform on top container in order to update them with the necessary location. I will say that researchers from the public side do not see locations. They are for internal use. If you use the request button in the public interface, it is something that you will see in an email sent to you if that top container, or if it has a top container associated with that record they're requesting, you will see the location information, but the user won't. The email you get about the request will have that location information. It's been handy to us, and we like using locations to be able to manage them this way. And I believe that's all I have for locations. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Brittany. There was a question about batch editing locations or doing some batch work with locations. You answered that, so I'm going to clear that question. If you keep the end date blank, will it stay there forever?
A location will stay associated with a record for however long. Yeah, it will stay there forever unless you go back and remove it.
Yeah.
So you have to go into it to remove it. An end date does not automatically remove that location from it when that end date occurs. It's an action you still have to perform.
Thanks, Brittany. Can folks with repository manager permissions edit top level container locations and manage top containers?
Yes. Repository manager, actually, group, you would go to manage groups to see the functions of a group. So, and it lists if they can edit and create locations as a function. So if you have the ability to edit groups, if you're like a sysadmin or I think repository managers see this list as well. You should be able to see the groups and see what they are able to do and edit what they're able to do. Not going to do that.
Thanks, Brittany. All right. There was one other question, and I went ahead and answered it. So that is answered in the Q&A. Someone was asking, is there a keystroke, so there's a shortcut that can be used to save a record? So I put a link there. You can use that link to see the available shortcuts that come just out of the box with ArchivesSpace. And then there's also a plugin that adds a lot more shortcuts if you're interested in that. So I did put that in the Q&A as well.
Yeah, please note that the shortcuts work is probably dependent on your browser, and sometimes between versions things stop working. It was very hard. There's hardly any that are system supplied, and it was very hard to get those to work consistently because, you know, like Control S means so many different things in Windows. Yeah. So yes, they're there. I would recommend the plugin ones. They're probably a little more heavily tested.
Yeah.
Thanks, Malika. Yeah, I was about to say save is Control S for me, but I'm on a Mac and I know that doesn't always work the same way. Okay, we don't have any questions in the Q&A right now. So I guess, Brittany, if you're ready, we can go ahead and move on. We're moving on from locations. So if you do have any questions about locations, please do go ahead and put them in. We're about to move on to start talking about imports in ArchivesSpace. So any last minute location questions? Now is your chance. All right. Let's move on to imports, Brittany.
Okay. So as we talked about a few days in this training, there are ways to import your data into ArchivesSpace. There's a load via spreadsheet button for resource records, and there's ways to import data and through background jobs. So you can get to import data by going to the Create menu, selecting background jobs, and clicking on Import Data. From there, you are offered a drop down of the various types of imports you can do. So mark XML for an accession record, mark XML for resource, subject and agent, and authority files for agents. You can also import your locations via CSV. So, and even you can even do even more with that CSV than 1,000 that a batch creation allows you to do. You can import EAD for your resources, an EAC CPF file for agents, digital object, assessment, and accession CSV. So those are the options that you have. And I can show you where to get to some of these templates, but we've shown it before. It's in the migrations and data mapping area in the ArchivesSpace website. So we're going to select the type of record we'd like to import. So we're going to do an accession CSV. Once you've selected it, you can either do the add file or drag and drop files here. So I'll show you quickly what we're importing. This is what it looks like in Google Sheets. We're importing the succession record. Let me make sure I've downloaded it. Okay, and we'll go back into downloads. We'll drag and drop that here. And then you just click start job. If you decide, oh, I don't want to do this and you need to use a different file, you can delete this. You can do multiple, you can cancel it. So just be aware. So once you start that, the background job process starts. It adds it to the queue. It starts running the job. And you can see the log. And then once it's done, we refresh the page. And you can scroll down to see the new and modified record, which is some papers. You can click on that and open up your newly created accession record. It opens it in view mode, just FYI. So if you do need to edit it, you would just edit it here. It shows you all that's been added, which we see an identifier, which is the only required field, the accession date. We see it has extent. And a container summary that looks like it should be in another place, but I recommend editing your CSV file, making sure everything is mapped correctly, because these are EAD maps. So if you need to edit it, you can just go into edit mode, but that's one thing that you can import. We'll go back to import data so I can show you other ones. So now let's import an EAC CPF record. If this one gives you the option to check important maintenance events, and you can do so if needed. We'll go back to my Google Drive folder here. This is the file that we're importing. It's an XML record. It might be dangerous. I appreciate Google Drive for letting me know that. So we'll drag and drop that here. We'll start that job. Go through the same process as the last one. So if you do have an import error, it will give you that. So that is what happens when a job fails. You can refresh the page and you can see the log of why and download the file associated with why it failed. I mean, that's an old file, so I understand why it failed. So let me show you an EAD import. Actually, I'm going to go back to import data, choose EAD from the dropdown, and move this. So we can see that this one was created. We can refresh the page. And now we have the stump papers as well as 2 agent records created. So we can see both of those records. And that's another way to get resource records into ArchivesSpace. You can import the EAD for them, especially if that's how you currently have them as EAD. It's easy to just import them into ArchivesSpace and have the associated information with the various fields imported. And you can see all the information associated with it. It was not a multi-level resource record. So if you wanted to add archival objects, you can do that by going into edit mode and such. So that is importing of data. like I said, you can import various types of data. So your subjects, your agents, your locations, digital objects if you want. So if you wanted to see the templates for some of those, you would go to the ArchivesSpace homepage. So they're using ArchivesSpace again. Click on Migration Tools and Data Mapping. Scroll down. Data import and export templates. So you can see the accession CSV template, the assessment, digital object, location, EAD, the marking, XML imports, and then the new version of the CAC CPF. I was using an old version of the import. So all those would take you to GitHub where you can download those templates and use them to import the data. I recommend considering it, especially if your accession records live in spreadsheets. You can easily move that data over into the template and get your accession records into ArchivesSpace so you have data that you can work with. So that is all I have for import. Do you have any questions?
Thanks, Brittany. Nothing in the Q&A right now, but I'm pausing.
I'd like to point out one thing, and it
Yeah.
will happen to you if you import EADs a lot. That drop down list, you're going to accidentally hit XML or vice versa, and it's going to do the background job and it's going to say it's successful. And then you're going to go, but it didn't do anything. Well, that's usually because you picked the wrong format.
Yeah. So make sure you're choosing the right one.
All right. If we don't get any questions about imports, Malaka, would you be cool with maybe doing exports before the break and then seeing where we are with time since we are ahead of schedule?
Sure, I could do that.
And maybe that'll drum up some questions thinking about imports and exports together. So if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and thank you, Brittany, for going over locations and imports, and we'll let Malaka take over with exports before we go to a break. So Malaka, take it away.
All right, share screen, share ArchivesSpace. If you're following along in your workbook, I'm on page 120. ArchivesSpace enables the production of several export options for agent and resource records. For agent records, you've got encoded archival context, otherwise known as EAC CPF, or you could download them as XML. For resource records, you have EAD in 2002 version, or you could have EAD 3 or Mark XML. And for digital objects, oh, those are fun. You got mods, METs, and Dublin Core. So the exports are XML documents produced in compliance with community standards and are usable in information systems such as ILSs or EAD databases. All the exports produced by ArchivesSpace are intended to foster access to the described materials. They're on the ArchivesSpace page that Brittany showed you. It'll also show you the mappings of where particular notes would go to, for example, in an EAD, what those would be tagged as, that you could experiment with if you want. So let's just go ahead and start exporting. The first thing we'll export is an agent record. So we'll go here. Let's look at the Ada Oil Corporation. You could do this, you could export from either the view or the edit mode. I'm going to go into the view mode. And up here, you have download Mark XML Authority, or you could download EAC CPF, whichever you prefer. I'm going to download the Mark XML Authority, and then I will show it in the folder, and we'll open that up, and there you go. That's what it looks like in XML. Close that. Next we'll do the digital objects, just because they have a lot of different things you could do to those. Let's go to the Army Ant lure. And again, you could do view or edit. So for a digital object record, instead of one handy button, you've got, two handy buttons. You've got this one export button, but it has a down arrow, which of course means you're going to have flyouts. You could download it as a mods record. You could download it as a Dublin core record, or you could download a METS record. And if you do that, you need to choose whether you want it as mods or Dublin core. So let's go ahead and do a METS and choose Dublin core. So you noticed if you move the thing, it goes away, but the radio button is still there, because you actually then have to come back carefully with your mouse and click on download METS. And so that is here. And that's a METS record for that particular digital object. Let's do a resource record. Resources. Oh, let's do the Krispy Kreme. But no, let's do Jedediah because it's not as big. I'm going to do that from the edit view, but again, you could do it on view or edit. And up here is your export button. For resource records, you've got several more options. You could download the EAD and you have some choices. You could download a mark XML. You could download container labels. Download the container template. As you recall, that's what you would download if you were going to use the CSV spreadsheet that results to edit information, add other information, and then import it back up, the top containers. And you also have the option to generate a PDF. Let's do download EAD. You have several options. You can include unpublished things. You could include a DAO tag, use numbered C tags, or you could download as EAD3 schema. So right now this is checkmarked. So if I had any archival objects here that were unpublished, i.e. the public couldn't see them, if this is checked, when I download the EAD, it will include those series, files, items, etc. I could uncheck this and it will create an EAD that does not include the things that are not published. Totally up to you. Obviously, you have those things turned off for a reason, so you might want to uncheck that box. DAO tags are digital object tags that if you have an instance that is linked to a digital object, this will include those tagged elements in your EAD download. This one, I really, really, really wish it was set to default checkmarked, but it never is. Use numbered CO tags. So this would be the CO1s and then the CO2s and the CO3s. If you don't have that checked, your EAD, all of them are going to just be C tags. And so you kind of lose the hierarchy there. And EAD3, you could export it, but you can't import it at this point. So we're going to have the numbered C tags. We're going to include unpublished. We're going to click on download EAD. And that's it right there. And so that's what that record is. An EAD download will include all your containers. Let's look at a mark XML download. So if you do here, download mark, you also have that flyout for include unpublished. So if there were unpublished things, again, it would not show up in the mark XML, but we're going to click on download mark XML. Here it is. And you'll notice, obviously it looks different because it's XML, but those containers did not show up. Mark XML is more of a collection level record, and it doesn't go down to the item level like an EAD. So be aware of that. And we got other export options. Container labels. I'll do that one. Cue that up. Goes to a background job and you have to wait for it to be done, and then you have to refresh the page, and you don't see things down here in new and modified records. It's here under file. And so it downloaded that. Now let me go back here and I'm going to import it into my spreadsheet. Maybe. There. We'll go to the download folder where it's at. Oh man. We'll change this to all files so that I can see it. There we go. And import it. And oh, I hate this thing. I have that the cloud version of Microsoft. I really prefer the clients. So here is the spreadsheet that it downloads for the container labels, which you could then use to obviously print off container labels for your boxes. So you might find that helpful at some point. Let's go back to browse resources, good old Jedediah. And then the final one I'm going to show you is the generate the PDF. Again, you can have a check mark here for include unpublished, or you could say, oh, I don't want to see anything that's not published. You click on generate PDF. It throws you into the background job, and you need to wait for it to complete. Hopefully it doesn't happen to you, but if you end up with an error downloading a PDF of a resource record, it's likely something to do with ampersands. As you know, in a lot of programs, XML included the ampersand as an escape thing. So if you have like Texas A&M University with an ampersand somewhere that it doesn't like to have for the ampersand to be, you might have issues downloading PDFs. They're always working on it. Do please report them when you do find errors like that. Of course, you're going to have to go ahead and manually fix those so that they know that, oh yeah, we have to fix it in that note field also. So here is a PDF export from for the Jedediah record. It is formatted. This is the default format. You can go in and adjust the CSS for this to be something else if you don't like it this way. Of course, you know, you have to have the knowledge to do that. So a lot of small places probably go, okay, I'll take this because it's better than nothing. And that is exporting a resource record. There is no way, as far as I can remember, for accession records to be downloaded, as you can see. But there is a plugin where you could print this and it gets rid of all the spaces so that it'll print on like 1 or 2 pages as opposed to like, you know, 50 pages because it puts in all this extra stuff when you do just a screen print. I think that more or less covers everything about exports. Did we want to take a break or move into reports?
We've got some questions, so if you want to go ahead and do the questions. And like Malika said, there's no export option for accessions because there's no descriptive standard for accessions, but it is possible if you want, if you go to browse accessions, you can download a CSV of all of your accessions. So if you just want to see what all you've got, you can go to browse accessions and select that download CSV and it'll just download a CSV of everything you have, but that's sort of it. It's pretty limited. So in the Q&A, there is a question about importing. Our accession numbers are auto-generated thanks to some background work by our system staff. How might this work or not if we were to upload accession records via CSV?
Are they automatically generated in ArchivesSpace? Because if so, I probably would take some work on the system side to like make sure that CSV works, because that's the required field in order to import that CSV.
Yeah.
And make sure it doesn't fail.
She just said yes, they're auto-generated.
Yeah. If you've got a plugin that's auto-generating them after if you create them manually in ArchivesSpace, then doing a bulk load via CSV won't work. But I would think that you could have a auto generation macro in your spreadsheets that would create them, and then they would have an identifier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say go to your systems team and ask them specifically how, like what they've set up, and see if they can help you with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's nice to have.
Yeah. Oh yeah. All right. Then this question's about exports, but the question, which download type is best?
It'll depend on your needs.
Yeah.
For example, if we used to have, prior to starting using the public user interface that's provided with ArchivesSpace, we used to have our own EAD instance. So we would create records in ArchivesSpace, and then when we were ready to publish them, we would download them and then upload them to a separate system as EAD. If we also use MarkXML now for any resource record we create. We also add a record to OCLC, which is a MARC-based program. So we download the MarkXML, import that into OCLC, clean it up a little bit, and then update our holdings so that it's actually added to OCLC that way.
Yeah, same actually. So we first were doing XTF and then moved to the public user interface. So we would download the EAD, including the C numbers, and we would also, well, I don't do this, but our digital services would download MarkXML and update OCLC. We now just download PDF to include in our collection control files of completed finding aids. And I don't think we export much of anything else unless it's necessary for like some review work or editing work.
Thanks. Yeah, like they said, it'll just sort of depend. If you look at your larger collections management or records management infrastructure and determine what sort of exports you need to play well with those systems, and that will be the best one for you. Another question in the Q&A, can you set the label export to other programs so we can print directly onto labels using a template we already have?
I have no idea. I mean, I'm sure it's using some sort of CSS to generate the spreadsheet. So if you've got an IT team that could look into how that's done, they might be able to download it however you want.
Yeah, I've never tried anything with it. We don't use that. We just create our own.
Yeah, there's probably not going to be an easy way to do that in the staff user interface, but like Malika said, if you have like a sysadmin or an IT team that you could reach out to about that, there's maybe something they could do to get things out using, I don't know, the API or something. But it's definitely worth exploring. All right. Looks like we're all caught up in the chat. And I think let's go ahead. It's the top of the hour. Let's go ahead and take a break, actually, Malaka, and then we can do reports and data cleanup and customizations when we get back. So let's take a 15-minute break. And then we'll come back at 15 minutes after the hour to wrap up the rest of the training. So see everyone in 15 minutes.
Alrighty, so the information about reports actually is not in your workbook. The application ArchivesSpace comes populated with a variety of default administrative reports. The default reports allow staff to produce administrative and statistical data about the holdings of a repository and then download the information in a variety of formats. Reports can only be run in installations with a MySQL database backend, because the default one is the Derby stuff. Yeah, it won't work that way. They cannot run on the embedded Derby database. Yeah. Okay, so if you want to create a report, you can click here where this gear is. And down here, you can select reports. And it gets you to this page where we have the left navigation. As you can see, everything's in alphabetical order here. Or you could scroll down, whichever way you like to get the things. We have a session reports. We have digital objects, locations, resources, shelf list, and other stuff. And like in the regular records, this left navigation will quickly get you one place or another. So you could get from there back up to here, however you want to do it. I think the one that most people use is the unprocessed sessions report. So it gives you the name and then it tells you what fields are included in the report. So this says displays only those sessions that have not been processed. The report contains a session number, linked resources, title, extent, cataloged, date processed, a count of the number of records selected with date processed, and the total extent number for those records without a completed date subfield. So if you want to run this report, you would click on select, and it would take you to a new background job page that says create report. And then you could select whatever format you want from the drop down. We have JSON, CSV, HTML, PDF, or RTF. I'm going to do HTML. And then I'm going to click on Start Job. And it throws you to the lovely background jobs page that we have all become familiar with today. And then you get a log. And then you click on Refresh Page. And just like when you downloaded the PDF, this information is here rather than down here in the new and modified records. So you would click on Download Report. And it drops it down here. And we open it up because it's an HTML. And it says we have 4 sessions and 4 unprocessed sessions. And it gives you various information about each of these sessions. And so that is one kind of report. Another type of report we have that people like to use. Let's see, click on reports. Is the resource lists report. The resource list includes basic information, dates, and extents for resource records. So again, you would click on select. You could pick what kind of download you want, start job. And once it's done, we'll click on refresh. And then we'll download that report and open that up. And here is your list of resources. So those are pretty handy. Coming up in the next version of ArchivesSpace, depending on how testing goes, there'll be a way to customize reports actually built into, well, there'll be a way to create custom reports built into ArchivesSpace. So stay tuned for that. Another type of report you could get is, let's go here to home. You might notice on the browse screens for the sessions resource, digital objects, subjects, and agents, they have a download CSV button up here. And you can actually use that to download everything on this screen. So if I click download from the screen, I would get these 9 records, their titles, their identifier, their level, their dates, and their extent. If I wanted to narrow this down to anything that had just letters, we don't have anything that's letter. Let's do papers up here. So I have 46 items that have paper. I could use these filters here to go, oh, well, I want the archival objects that say papers. And so now there's 26 records. And then, you know, I could keep adding filters if I wanted to get down to the records that I wanted in my report. And then I would click on download CSV. And then I would open up a new sheet and data. Then we would import from CSV here. Load that. And there's the CSV of the archival objects that have papers in them. And again, it's showing you only the columns that are displayed here. This will become more useful when I show you how to customize your interface so that you could have additional columns if you prefer, which would then, of course, download in your CSV. Sorry, my cat was jumping up here. Okay, so any questions about reports or downloading CSVs?
Yep, a couple, Malaka. So one question that I answered in the chat or in the Q&A was, is it possible to track use statistics via reports? So ArchivesSpace doesn't track use statistics, but I do know that a lot of ArchivesSpace users apply Google Analytics to their implementation. Maybe Malaka and Brittany, you can speak to that.
Yeah, I don't think we have. Well, yes, we did put Google onto our public user interface. I just haven't looked at the data in a while.
Yeah, we use Google Analytics for our public user interface. But our digital services controls that, so I haven't seen it that much.
There's another question asking if you can limit the resource report by date.
Some of these, I think you can put in parameters, but most of them is all or nothing.
Yeah, it depends on which resource report you're interested in, but yeah, these canned reports are pretty limited in terms of what they can do. It is possible to actually create custom reports. And so getting into Jerry, your question, we're not able to talk about creating custom reports in this training, but it is possible. I would recommend, if you're interested in creating custom reports, to reach out to the listserv to see what other people are doing, if they have any tips or tricks, and check out our technical documentation, which is on our website. Additionally, in your agenda, there is a link to a GitHub called the Awesome Archive Space, or you'll hear people call it the Awesome List. It's a list of frequent or created community generated resources. And you can find several different custom reports there.
In addition, what I didn't mention is some of these reports will be run faster than others. It'll all depend on the size of your database. You know, you could see that if you had 4,000 items and you said, oh, download everything in here, that'll take a lot longer than going, oh, well, just give me the reports that the 3 things that we bought on this day or whatever, if there's a report for that. So be aware that it's working in the background, it's chugging away. And since it is a background job, you can do other things while it's running.
Thanks, Makia. Heather asks, is reports functionality available to all users with a staff login?
I believe so.
I think it depends on the group.
Yeah.
For basic. Well, yeah, you do have to turn on background jobs, and I don't think that's there by default.
Yeah, if they have the ability to, it might be
Yeah.
separate from background jobs. Yeah.
Create and run background jobs.
And then a question about the code behind the standard reports. All of the code is available on GitHub. So I'm going to clear that out.
Yeah, you can work with the API and config file to figure out how to create your own custom reports.
Yeah, and what I've done is I have an ODBC link to my MySQL database, read only, and I pull things that way. And that way I can get a lot more fields and a lot more narrow stuff. The only thing is notes fields, because that's called a blob, a binary digital object. It's just this big mess. We can't do anything with those in the ODBC.
I will drop into the chat a link to the ArchivesSpace test server. So this is it's everything that's currently being worked on, and it includes the custom reports, what is currently being worked on for a future release of ArchivesSpace. Keep in mind, this is just a test server. It goes up and down constantly depending on the work that's being done. And what you're seeing there is not a finished product. It's not a release. It's not anything that that is available, and it's not a finished product, like I just said. But if you would like to go there and look at the current working version of custom reports, that would be great. The more people that can look at it and think about the sort of custom reports that they may need for their own institution, the better. So I will drop that in the chat. Username admin, password admin. But like I said, keep in mind, it may not always be available because we're constantly updating things, and things are always subject to change in test. All right. Not seeing any other questions about reports. So Malaka, if you want to go ahead and move on.
Alrighty, so for a number of reasons, imperfect source data, data incompatibilities between the source data format and ArchivesSpace database schema, and inconsistent data entry, data in ArchivesSpace may require some form of cleanup. Data cleanup can be lessened by some extent by making sure that the source data is in as good a shape as you can get it before importing records. And some of these inconsistencies might affect your agents and subject records. ArchivesSpace will, if you import a record, with a Jane Doe on it, and then you import another record with Jane Doe on it, if your source and description rules match exactly, then it will create just one and it won't create that second one. But if they are not matched exactly, then it will create two separate agent records, and you're going to want to only have one. So there is a way in ArchivesSpace to merge records. Another thing that frequently happens with us is, the session comes in, the student that's sessioning these things just puts in a name, Jane Doe. They don't search the NIF for authorized form. The cataloger uses the authorized form. So then we have the accession record with one form, the resource record with another form. The contact information is on the agent record that the accession was on, and we want to merge all this information into one big happy record. So for example, if we go here, browse agents, and I do Santa, I put two Santa Claus records in here. This first one, if you view it, is linked to the accession and a digital object. And if we go back, the Santa Claus fictitious character record is linked to the resource record. What I want to do is merge the records. So I go back here, go back to the Santa filter. So from here, I would select which record I want to be the record I keep. So I'm going to use the Santa Claus fictitious character record. I could do this in either view mode or edit mode. I'm going to do it in view mode. And the main reason I picked this one is because it has all sorts of more information than is on the other record that I don't want to rekey in or have to move over. So from here, there's a merge button and it has a down arrow. You click on that, and this is where you would type in, or you could browse the heading that the heading you want to merge into this record. So there's Santa Claus there. So you click it so that it's blue. Now it will let you type another one here. Don't do it, because when you click on merge, it's going to say you can't do that. So just spare yourself some time. Don't type in another search, just click on merge. So then you're going to get one more chance to back out of this. So it's going to say that fictitious characters will have the selected records merged into it, which is what we want. So we're going to click on compare agents instead of cancel. So this way we can compare the two records and see if there's any information in the record that will be deleted, which is on the right, that we want to move over into the record that will be updated, i.e. kept. So the Santa Claus record that's going to be deleted has not much information. We have this pink box so that you know that that's probably, it draws your eye. This is where all the important information is. It's the name form. So in my name form, I have indirect Claus, Santa, and they have it entered directly as Santa Claus. But they also have this cross reference. So I don't feel the need to put any of this form over here. But if I did, all I would have to do would be to click on add, and I could add this as yet another name form. Or if for some reason I actually liked this form better than this form, I would click on replace. And so it would replace everything over here with what's over here. And I don't want to do either one of those in this instance. So I'm going to leave them both blank. Mainly what I wanted to do was go all the way to the bottom where the contact information is. And you notice this has no contact details and this does. So I'm going to click on add. And what that's going to do is move all this information into the NAF record that the cataloger had imported. If you're paranoid, I want to make sure you do everything correctly and didn't replace something accidentally that you didn't want to replace. There is a merge preview. This button's available down at the bottom of the record, and it's also available all the way at the top. So if we click on merge preview, it loads, and then we could go down all the way to the bottom, and you'll see that the contact information is now included in to the very, very long record that has all those IDs and things. Clicking on continue here, I know my staff are like, but I wasn't ready to actually merge it. This does not merge it. It just closes that preview window. So don't panic. Okay, so if you got the record how you want it and you've previewed it, you can then click on merge. Or if you really do want to change your mind one more time, you have one more option to cancel. Again, the cancel button's available here and again up at the top. I'm going to click on merge. Ta-da! And now this final record it has contact information. Here it is. The contact details are right here. So that did come over. Now you'll see it says just one resource record. It takes a while for the database to catch up with where we are. So let's do a refresh and see where the linked records are. So now rather than me having to go to the digital object record and a session record and move them into the only remaining record, you'll see it move those over for us. So that's very handy. Which is, you know, the whole point of merging. So not only do you have the record the way you want it, it moved all of the linked records to the remaining record. So we could also merge subject records. So let's go up here to browse. We got subjects. And you'll notice here I have 3 different records for archives. One is a topical, 2 are genres, 1 is Library of Congress, 1 is TGM, and 1 is Mesh. I only want 1 archives because it's difficult enough trying to figure out what each vocabulary means by archive. So I'm going to narrow this all down to 1. So you're going to open the record that you want to keep. And I'm going to do this in view mode. I have a resource and a digital object attached to this one. If I go back here to the medical heading, for example, it has an accession attached to it. So just like with the agent records, whatever one I pick, all the other ones will, the linked records will merge onto that, which is very handy. I'm going to click on merge. And then I'm going to use the type ahead, but again, you could use the browse if you would rather. I'm going to type in archives. And you'll notice since I have 3 archives record, 1 I have open and 2 additional records. That's why you see this here twice. So I'm going to click on that first one. So it's blue linked. Now remember this box where for agent records, you could only do 2 records at a time because you could only compare 2 records at a time. Subject records, you're not going to be comparing them. So you could add additional subject records here till the cows come home if you want. So I'm going to do archives again. And since this one's already linked, now you'll see that there's only 1 more choice. So that's one way to keep track of if you've got them all. So now I have 2 lovely blue links. I can cancel or I can click on merge. I'm going to click on merge. And it says the subject archives will have the selected records merged into it. All selected records will be deleted and any linked records will be relinked to this subject. So here's your last chance to change your mind. You could click on cancel or you could click on merge. I'm going to click on merge. And now I only have, if I go here, I only have 1 archive subject heading. And if I click on view and wait a little while, all the other ones, so now there's 4. So they all moved here, which is again, very handy. So that's one way to clean up data. There's also some customizations that can be done to your interface that we're going to talk about next. And that would be on page 160. The staff and public user interface that are provided by ArchivesSpace can be customized for local use. Repository managers can provide simple customizations of the staff interfaces using tools available in the staff interface. More extensive customizations to both the public and staff interface can be made by defining local files in the plugins folder of the application. So the public interface customization is mainly done through plugins, which we're not going to cover, but the key thing you need to remember is you can customize it. There's information out there on the listserv and GitHubs of how to do that sort of thing. The staff interface, on the other hand, has a few ways that you can customize things. If you go to, let's see, here where your name is, we have global preferences, repository preferences, and user preferences. Global preferences will set whatever customizations you make to every single repository in your instance. Repository preferences would set your preferences for just a single repository, the repository you're in when you create the preferences. And a user preference overrides all of those. And it's just what the user sitting there wants. And everybody has access to it, the very least user preferences. It'll depend on your settings for whether you have global and repository preferences. I'm going to go ahead and set up repository preferences for this example. So I'm going to click here. And we get this lovely window with navigation. As you can see, it goes on for a while, which is why there's navigation. So general settings, that section, we have show suppressed. So if you suppress a record, and this is not selected, if the record is suppressed and you search for it, you're not going to find it. So if you want your staff to be able to see records that are suppressed, you would put a check mark here. When you create a record, as you recall, the publish buttons are everywhere in ArchivesSpace, at the top, in the middle, on notes. Sometimes you have to publish 2 or 3 different parts of a note just to get the whole note to publish, which is why we all love that publish all button. But if you want things by default when they're created to be published, you could have put a check mark here. I'm going to skip this pre-populate records for right now, because we'll come back to it in a minute or two. This language selection is not going to put English into every record you create. This is actually what language you want the interface to be in. Currently, I want it in English because that's my native language, but this interface has been translated into French, Japanese, and Spanish. So if you wanted the Japanese form of repository preferences, you would click on Japanese and your interface would be in Japanese. So I'm gonna leave it as English, of course. The next section that you could customize is the note order. When creating a note in any of the records, every new note gets added to the end of the notes. So if you have like 15 notes, and the last note you added was the abstract, it's going to be the last note. This does not, of course, affect the public user display. It's just in the staff user modules. But for example, in my institution, we want all of our notes to be in alphabetical order so that way, if you're in a record to edit it, you kind of go, oh, well, I want to change the physical description note. I know it starts with a P, so it's going to be pretty far down there in all the notes, as opposed to, oh, well, it's all the way at the top. So what you can do is, again, you get these 3 lines. You can move things around. So we got abstract. We got conditions governing access. I could put the accruals up here. What else? Immediate source of acquisitions. So you just click and drag them around. And then we'll save those preferences. And let's go look. Well, let's create a blank resource record. And I'll show you that. Oh, it didn't come over. Isn't that interesting? Oh, I bet I have user preferences set. And save those preferences and create, and then create a resource, and it has published. Let's go to a actual record, resource record. Let's go to, let's go to Jedediah. And here's the notes. There are 7 of them. Scope and content, biography, physical. So these are the notes in some random order. You'll see down here it says apply standard note order, and up here it says apply standard note order. If you have set your note preferences and saved, then when you click on that, it changes the order of notes. And again, since apparently this instance has user repository filled in, those trump the repository preferences that I was setting up. But they did change because now separated materials down there. So however you want to manage your notes is in there. We'll go back here and click on user preferences. And yes, I want to leave because I don't care how the notes are. That's not my record. We have search and browse column preferences down here. Yeah, so right now, if I browsed in a session record, the columns you are going to see are title, identifier, and a session date, dates, and extent. But here in columns 6 and 7, I could add actually 2 more columns, and I could choose any other value, or I could repeat the title if I'm really weird. I'm going to go ahead and add audit information here. You could also default sort column. So when you do a browse, the records are going to be arranged in title order in ascending direction. If I would rather, when I call up the session records, if I would rather they be in relevance order, which makes no sense because you haven't done a search, but trust me, it will be different. I could do that. So default sort order relevance, and then I save these preferences, and let's go to browse sessions. So now it's no longer in alphabetical order because Jane Doe would have been first and the stump people would have been last. And I have audit information included, which I always find helpful. It tells when the record was created and when the record was last updated. And remember this download CSV, it's going to download any column that you see here. So that's where you could go into your personal user preferences. And if you didn't want the identifiers to be in your downloaded CSV, then remove them from the preferences. If there were other, because we had room for at least 1 more column, if there was 1 more column you want to include, then add that to your user preference. So let's go here to user preferences again. So that was the accession browse. You also have the agent browse, and you could have whatever you want there. Here's a list of values: name, agent type, published, authority ID, source rules, is user, and audit information. So you could experiment with those. Here's the archival object columns. So if I added here the audit information and saved that, and then did a browse of resources, and I put show components, then some of the component records, see they have the record type, so it tells you it's an archival object. The title identifier is blank because there's no component unique identifier in the archival object record for this particular title, and it tells you the parent resource record that that archival object is attached to, and the ever handy audit information. Let's see, there's a couple of other things. I mean, all of them are similar. To that, you could have your backgrounds jobs sorted a certain way, the digital object browse, but we also have search. So search columns, we have some defaults we could add. We got record type, title, found in, identifier, dates, extent, language of materials, created, modified, and audit information. Would also show in the search results because previously we were only looking at the browse results. The default sort column is relevance, and the default sort direction is descending, and we could change that if we wanted to. I'm going to change this default sort column from relevance to identifier, and we'll save that. And then we'll do a search here for collection. And so It's sorting by identifier, even though I don't have identifier displaying. Oh, yeah, it is. Okay, here's the, so it's in the identifiers first, and since it's identifying, it's in reverse alphabetical order, as you can see. So that is something you can configure. And then I think that's pretty much it. Like I said, everything's the same. They have information you could add to browse and search columns. So that's pretty handy for getting that publish box on or off for every record you create. Pre-populate records. When you go into a browse, let's see, browse resources, we have edit to default values. If you click on here, because it's a resource, it wants to know if you want to add default values for the resource record or the resource record component. I'm going to just do default values for the resource record. Now, it looks just like creating a brand new resource record, but it's not going to yell at me if I leave fields blank because this is just a template. So if, for example, I wanted every title to be the same thing for every resource record I create, then I could add information to the title. If I want my identifiers to all start with the name of my library, for example, I could put that in here as the identifier, and then any records I created, not spawned, created, would have that information in the identifier. What I want to do is have it say publish. I want it to say English here and not have to ever type that again. Latin here. And then down here in the finding aid metadata, you could also set that for English and that for Latin. So you would use this template for data that is going to be the same every single time. Or if you have a large project, like I said, if you're going to be manually adding resource archival objects with the same title for like 2 days straight, you might come in and set yours so that the titles are all the same, however you want to use it. So I'm going to click on save. And if I click on create, it is not going to put that information in. So I'm now creating a new record. So you see it's not there. And that's because I need to go here to my user preferences or repository preferences, etc., and click on pre-populate records. If this is turned off, then even though I've set up templates, it won't actually add to the record. So now I've pre-populated my records with a check mark. And now when I click on create a resource record, I have English and Latin here, and I have in the finding aid data section, it says English and Latin. So now I never have to find that again. Now, even though it populated with that, if I wanted to change this to Arabic, I can. There's nothing stopping me. We also use this template to add notes that are consistent across our resources. For example, the conditions governing access and the conditions governing use. We figure most of our collections are open for access and use. So we put that statement into our notes on these in the template. And then the few times that things are restricted, we go back and edit those notes. So that is how to do a template there. For digital objects, yes, I want to leave. When you edit default values, you also could do a digital object, or you could do it as a digital object component. So if you had something that you always wanted on the digital object component records that you manually create, then you would use this. You can also, for accessions, edit values. So Again, if your identifier, I think that's about the only, well, we do our identifier starts with the year. So usually in January, we come in here and change this first box to be the new year, and then we fill out the rest of the boxes. So we do use a session template for that. I think that's all I want to say about that. So before I move on to the controlled value list information, does anyone have questions about what they've seen so far?
Thanks, Malaka. There was a question about default values for sessions, but you showed that, so we're good to go.
Okie dokie.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Controlled value lists. Someone remarked, I think on the first day, at asking why there were two mixed materials. Again, one of those probably popped in due to an import error, or, you know, in this case, since it's a test database for instruction, we put it in there on purpose. But you'll probably have that same thing and you wouldn't have put it in there on purpose. On page 165 of your manual, it talks a little bit about the controlled value list. There are two different kinds. There's a configurable one and a non-configurable one. Let's look at the configurable ones. So to get to the controlled value list, it's under the system menu and it's manage control value lists. And then you have to figure out what your list name is. And what it does is it kind of puts the name of the record type as the first thing. And then if anything that has a drop down, for example, in any of these records, they're controlled here. So this one, a sessions acquisitions type. So this is in an sessions record. There's a drop down box in acquisition type, and this is the list that controls that. We're going to go down to subjects, dun, 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 and we're going to go down to the source. So this is a configurable list. There's many clues as to why, to tell the difference between a configurable and a not configurable. My favorite is the configurable ones have a lot of colors. See, it's pretty. You got red, you got this green, you got orange. But the other big thing is it has a box here that says create value. And on a non-configurable list, for example, let's go up here to language. Dun, dun, dun. This one is not configurable. You don't have a create value button. And you'd only have two ugly colors, white and brown, or yellow, depending on your browser. So let's talk a little bit about the non-configurable list. This list in particular, even though it's not configurable in that I can't add values to this list, I can do some things to it. I can, for example, set a FAR, if I wanted to, as the default by just clicking on set as default. I can suppress a record so that it doesn't display in the dropdown by clicking on the suppress button. However, the suppress button is only available to be used if over here in this column it says not used. So I'm going to just suppress a FAR and whatever that is in a Chinese. And so I have suppressed these three. And if I changed my mind, I could click on unsuppress and it unsuppresses them. The language that I want to make the default is English. So I'm going to do a find here. The first one it found is, of course, the English old and English there. But now I'm down to English and I want this one to be the default. And you notice the suppress is not available there because GLS, it has 14 related items that are using it. I could click on this 14 related items and it shows me the records that say English, which is probably all of our records so far. Let's go back here. Well, because I set English as the default language, when I spawn a record, which When I spawn a record, English will be the language in anything that has a language drop down. And so even though I put English into those templates and I'm saying use the templates, remember that does not affect spawning. But if you put it as a default here in the controlled value list, then it will affect even spawned records, if that makes sense. So let's go to a configurable list and see what all you could do that. So we're going to open up the subject source again. Subject source. So we have these sources here. I want to point out one thing. The value here is in lowercase letters, and the translation here for AAT is in uppercase letters. You can tell the values that were default values supplied by the system, because the value here will be small letters and the translation will be in capital letters. Whereas anything that was added by manually by clicking on create value or ingested off a record, the value and translation are going to be in the same case. And in this case, it's AACR2 small and AACR2 small. This one is small and big, so this one is supplied by default, but this NAF, for example, is not, so it must have been from an import or somebody manually created it. So if I want to create a value, for example, fast, I would click on create value, and I would type in, I could type it in as FAST, or I could type it in as FAST. It really doesn't matter, because what it's going to do, and I'm going to do it as capital FAST, it's going to create a value with the translation exactly the same. Now, if you have IT people who have access to your back end, there is a way to go in and fix that in the YAML file, and instructions are in your manual for getting there and doing that, if you prefer. So now I have a new subject heading source called fast. Let's see. You also have set as default, so you could set any of these as your default, or you could just choose them from the drop down. If you prefer, you could also suppress them so they don't appear in the drop down. You could merge records, and I'll show you that in a few minutes, or you could delete. And again, you could only delete if it's not used. You could only suppress if it's not used. The other thing is, if I want everybody using fast in my dropdown, I want that one to be the first heading in the dropdown. So these arrows, if I click on here, now fast went up 1. If I want it to go up another 1, I could click here. And now it's gone up 2. Or if I want AACR2 to go down 1, I would click on the down arrow. So you can move things up and down. They're not necessarily, your lists are not necessarily in alphabetical order, and you certainly don't have to keep your drop-down lists in alphabetical order. And you could change the position on configurable lists also. So if you wanted to move English all the way to the top, that's fine, but you saw how far down that was, and you got to do these one at a time. So that'll take some time. Let's go and merge some values that shouldn't be there. So let's see if I go to instance type. So let's go to the instance type list. Instance type. So in addition to being lowercase letters, the ones that are supplied by default, there's also no spaces. So that's why you'll have the underscore over here. So I have mixed materials and I have mixed materials. So I have it in 2 areas and I want it all to be in 1 area. You could merge values regardless of whether the value is used in a record or not. So I'm going to merge mixed materials with mixed materials, but this one says not used and this one is used a lot, and that doesn't matter. So it's only the suppress and the delete where the number of uses matter. So what I want to do is I want to click on the record I actually want to get rid of. So unlike when we were doing the agents where you open up the record you want to keep, in this case, I'm going to open up the merge for the record I want to get rid of. So I click on merge here, and then it lists, has a drop-down list of all the values in this controlled value list, and I have to select what I want to merge it into. So I click on mixed materials. I could cancel if I want, or if I want to proceed, I click on merge value. And now there's only one mixed materials. If the other mixed materials actually had records using that value, they would have been added to this count here. So instead of 608, say I had 2 other ones, so it would say 610. So it works similar to the subject and agent browse in that it goes behind the scenes and squishes everything up for you. So that's always nice. Let's go look at, now that we've set a default value and changed some things, let's create a resource record. So we got publish, we got this language here, and of course I set it as English as a default, but I wanted to show you that, see now, a FAR no longer shows, oh, let's go up here, as one of the languages because I had suppressed it. So that's one thing. If I go down here to subjects, add a subject, click on create. When I go here to source, we added fast. And so now you see that fast is there. So that's what your controlled value lists can do for you. Let's see, what do I got? User defined. Oh, other things you could do. In the controlled valued lists, let's get rid of this. Yes, I want to leave. In system, manage controlled valued lists. You remember there were all those user supplied ones at the bottom of all those records, the user defined. Here is where you could define those user defined. So if you wanted to now add values here, obviously it's a configurable list. So we could create a value of, oh, sunshine, it's raining here. So then if I go to create a resource and go down here to user defined and open up that, then this first controlled value list is now going to have sunshine as a value. So you could add those however you want. There's also in your manual on page 175 instructions for setting up human readable URLs. This system, the test instance that you're using, the instructor's instance, is not set up and configured at this time for human readable URLs. That's a decision you're going to need to make upon installation. I mean, you could say, oh, we want them, and then turn around later and take them off if you want to reboot everything. But it's not something I could sit here right now and go, hey, I want user defined URLs and have it happen instantaneously. So I recommend reading that if you want it. I know at my institution, we don't use it. It's just too much. It's too much trouble for what little worth it's going to give you. I think I've covered everything. So let's see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Wonka. That was a whirlwind.
Yes.
There is a question in the Q&A. If you set a default through the controlled list, does that impact just the repository you're in, or is it instance wide across all your repositories?
It will depend. Oh, I hate that thing. It will depend on here global repository. Oh no, if you're talking about in the controlled value list, that is the entire repository. Yes, that's right. So you can't have one have the default language of Japanese and one have a default language of English. They'll all be English.
Yeah. Are user-defined fields retained after you upgrade? Yes.
Yes, the default values are retained, but you're going to have to, if you actually change the labels in the YAML file, then those you'll have to put in a special spot so they don't get overwritten. So it'll always say controlled value 1, but you know, if I got version 5.0, it'll still say sunshine here.
All right. Let's see, nothing in the Q&A. Nothing in the chat. We'll give it a second. If there are no other questions about data cleanup and customization, any general questions before we wrap up? This is our last few minutes together. Is there a way to batch suppress languages? There are quite a few that we don't need.
No. But if once you do it, then you shouldn't have to do it again.
If you know that 9 times out of 10 you're going to be using one specific language, it probably would be best to create or to add a default value there.
Yeah, then they don't have to mess with the drop down at all.
Yeah.
Now we just have the default of English.
Yeah.
And then they can just change it if it's a different language.
Because you do have the type ahead. So, you know, if you wanted Russian, you don't have to actually scroll through.
Yeah.
I think English is actually the worst language for the type ahead because there's so many different variants.
3, yeah. Nathan asked in the chat, so if you set a default value like English, but then something comes up that 1 out of 10 instance, can you just change it? Yeah, you can just go in and change it to whatever you need for that particular record. Another way to use the default values that's really helpful is if you know that you always want to use certain note types, not necessarily that the content will always be the same, but you want them to always generate those notes. You can go in and maybe set a default value for each note, and the value just says, you know, a note about make sure you include this, and then you can go in and change it. So it's a good way to kind of like template your records if you want to make sure you include certain things.
Yeah, we always have 5 notes that we use. We pre-populate the right statement, but we always put required for the other notes, so people just fill that in the content section. So that way you only have to edit content and not the label that they created.
So this has an abstract note and you have to expand it and add content. If I had tried to save this without going in and adding content, it would have been one of the many, many errors listed up here because I haven't filled out anything, but but it'll say the property is required and is missing down here, and it's in pink. So that's one way we force our students to remember to fill in these notes. Rather than putting in this field has no note, we actually leave the content blank so that they have to fill out the note before they could save the record at all.
We do a lot of the descriptive notes towards the end of creating a finding aid, and they're like required. Finishing out the collection level is always required, right? So we just have them already there so they can go back and do it later.
Good solution. All right. Any other final questions about the training or anything that we covered over the past 4 sessions before we wrap up? In the meantime, if there are any last minute questions getting chatted, The recordings for the past 4 sessions will be made available on the ArchivesSpace YouTube channel in the coming days. Once we get those transcribed and everything, they'll be up on YouTube. There are also copies of previous workshops and trainings on the YouTube channel, so make sure you check that out. Once the trainings are available, that will be announced via our monthly update. Don't forget, your agenda has a lot of good information on it to carry you through beyond the training. There are some links at the bottom, some post-workshop resources. Our Getting Started webpage is a great place to look. Some like commonly used member resources. So if you are from an ArchivesSpace member institution, be sure to check those out. And then some links to some other community generated resources that might also be helpful. Also included down at the bottom is a workshop evaluation. So it would be really helpful if you could fill that out. This training is part of a 12-month pilot project to evaluate training for the ArchivesSpace community. So if you would like to see trainings continue or have any notes about training, community-wide training, please do fill that evaluation out. It'd be really helpful. Not seeing any other questions in the chat. So Brittany and Malaka, any last words from you?
Nope.
No.
Cool. We've said it all. There's nothing else to say. Thank you everyone for attending. Like I said, this is part of a 12-month training pilot. This is the last training for the calendar year, but we do have another training coming up in February that's going to be a 1-day training or a 1-session training about assessments. So keep an eye out for the announcements when the next trainings are offered. In the meantime, thank you to Brittany and Malaka for being our trainers for this session. It was great and you persevered. We all persevered through 4 training days during a really difficult and busy and hectic time. So thank you to you both for being willing to do that. And thank you all for attending. I will see you at the next ArchivesSpace event. Thanks, everybody.